Last year, during our Thanksgiving service, I announced that we would be starting a 4-week program spanning the 2020 holiday season called Gifts of Gratitude. It was meant in the midst of a prolonged pandemic to remind us of all that we had to be grateful for still. The program lasted nearly the entire month of December. Our intern minister ran the tech for our online meetings while I ran the sessions themselves. We had about a dozen people involved then, but at the end of the program, it became clear that people were not yet finished. They wanted to continue talking about the gratitude practices they had learned and adopted for themselves, and they wanted to form a regular group here at UU Wellesley Hills. So our weekly sessions became monthly ones that continued through June, when our program year was ending and our intern was departing. Even then, it was clear that people were not yet finished. We agreed that the gratitude group would continue into another program year and that going forward, it would be peer-led. Next month, this group will celebrate its 1-year anniversary. I invite you to come to that celebration, even if you've not been involved in this group previously. You might decide to become involved in it now. It is open to anyone interested in cultivating a more grateful outlook on life itself. As you well may imagine, there is always more for us to learn about that. Over the course of our monthly meetings, people drafted thank you letters to people they had loved and known, wrote poems of gratitude, led us in prayers of thanksgiving, sang songs of praise a cappella, no less, kept daily gratitude journals, and presented photo essays of some of the things they most appreciated in their lives. Someone created an anthology of our prayers and poems to be distributed, and then occasionally updated it. The pandemic continued to be prolonged, but soon people were starting to get vaccinated. The winter had passed, and spring was bursting into bloom. Witnessing the way that gratitude practices helped people cope, strengthen their resilience, and deepen their joy, in short, in all the ways it helped them to flourish, I decided to adapt the 4-week holiday program for an online course offered by the Ferry Beach Retreat Center in May 2021. Because I had wanted to expand the course a bit from its original format, I included another book as recommended reading. The late Oliver Sacks' slim volume, published posthumously, titled simply Gratitude. Some of you have no doubt read other books of Dr. Sacks. He has titles appearing on bestseller lists for nearly 50 years now, beginning in 1973 with Awakenings, his amazing first-person account working with catatonic patients in a Bronx hospital. A student of mine in the Ferry Beach course was a big fan of the neurologist author's work, and she recommended that I screen the PBS documentary made about the end of his life, which aired this past spring. Watching it with my husband proved a revelation to us. It powerfully illustrated autobiographical elements Dr. Sacks only alluded to in his elegiac collection on gratitude. Born to a Jewish family in London, Dr. Sacks' childhood was marred by an extended separation from his parents during World War II. While his experience was not uncommon among British youth in his generation, it was particularly traumatizing for him. His older brother suffered from the onset of schizophrenia as a teenager. Later, in his own adolescence, he acknowledged his sexual orientation to his parents, who rejected their gay son. In a fit of fury, his mother, quoting from the book of Leviticus, called him an abomination. In his 20s, he emigrated to the United States, where he spent the remainder of his life, although he never actually became a citizen here. I rather like the words resident alien, he once told a reporter. It's how I feel. I'm a sympathetic resident, sort of visiting alien. As a result of especially damaging incidents in his formative years, Dr. Sachs explained, he spent the majority of his life struggling with what he called the 3 Bs: bonding, belonging, and believing. His struggles most certainly contributed to his becoming such a sensitive observer of the human condition. During the course of his medical training, Dr. Sachs developed a drug addiction. It drove him to despair and very nearly to suicide. He engaged in reckless and physically demanding activities that pushed him to the brink and almost led to his demise more than once. His career as a medical researcher suffered, then ended. One of his supervisors at the laboratory where he worked told him, "Sachs, you're a menace. Get out. Go see patients. They matter less." While he did get out to see neurology patients, he was surprised to discover just how much they came to matter to him, personally as well as professionally. Caring for them gave him the motivation he needed to begin taking better care of himself. Although he would remain closeted for many more decades, he no longer felt the furious compulsion towards self-annihilation. He became the proverbial physician who healed himself. Dr. Sachs extended to patients the sort of compassionate regard he had longed for in his own life. Using a biblical term to describe his medical practice, he once said that he bore witness to his patients' plights. He remained forever grateful for that opportunity. Writing a New York Times opinion piece after he received his terminal diagnosis, an earlier cancer had returned and metastasized, he declared, "My predominant feeling is one of gratitude. I have loved and been loved. I have given much, and I have gotten something in return. I have read and traveled and thought and written. I have had an intercourse with the world. Above all," he added, "I have been a sentient being, a thinking animal on this beautiful planet, and that in itself has been an enormous privilege and adventure." As much as he appreciated the 9 good years he had after his initial cancer diagnosis, he explained, "This does not mean that I'm finished with life. Instead, it made him more determined to live his remaining days in ways that would make him feel still more alive." He stopped watching the evening news, but he continued to keep current on the latest issues of nature and science. He returned to his British homeland and visited relations in distant countries, bringing with him the man he fell in love with when he was 77 years old, the man who became a life partner in his final years. In A Harvest of Gratitude, our responsive reading this morning, another British expatriate who settled in America wrote, "Season follows after season. After winter, the spring. After summer, the harvest-laden autumn. We are given occasion to garner a harvest of the heart and mind, a harvest of resolve to be careful stewards of all life's gifts and opportunities, a harvest of reverence for the wondrous power and life at work in things that grow and in the soul. The things that grow in our own souls are not necessarily what we would have planted there, but they are ours to cultivate nonetheless. Dr. Sachs's life and death both remind me that each season of life can still yield good harvest if we are willing to bring our harvest home and share it with others. What better gratitude practice could there be for any of us here today? There is an unfortunate tendency these days for us to conflate the Thanksgiving holiday with triumphalist narratives of settler colonialism on these shores. Yet the reality is that its observance was enshrined much later in history. In October 1863, in the middle of the American Civil War, Abraham Lincoln issued a presidential proclamation that established the final Thursday in November as a national holiday. While he allowed that the war was of unequaled magnitude and severity, the president noted that otherwise, peace has been preserved with all nations, order has been maintained, and the laws respected and obeyed, and harmony has prevailed everywhere except in the theater of military conflict, where casualties were massive and, of course, tragic. Yet President Lincoln urged all of his fellow citizens in every part of the United States, and also those who are at sea and also those who are sojourning in foreign lands, to set apart and observe a day of thanksgiving and praise, honoring the heavenly benefactor who bestowed such singular deliverances and blessings in the midst of dire wartime, and offering their prayers for healing and tender care for those mourners and sufferers who had lost the most in what he called the lamentable civil strife. His was as profoundly humane a presidential proclamation as any that has ever been issued from the White House. He was not celebrating any victory. That seems to me a crucial remembrance each Thanksgiving we mark here in the United States. He was paying tribute to a project that was only underway and very obviously unfinished. To bring the country he was elected to lead into full enjoyment of peace, harmony, tranquility, and union, which he considered consistent with divine purposes, as he called them. Perhaps you have heard talk in media outlets this month about the joys of Vaxgiving. But those will not be shared in equal measure across the country. We're not in the middle of a national civil war, but these United States are deeply divided socially and politically, and the battleground in the latest of our regrettable and seemingly endless cultural wars now centers around medical treatments, the reliability of COVID vaccines, and the efficacy of coronavirus treatments in hospitals that are already stretched to the breaking point in some states. Our own movements may still be constrained by vaccination rates in particular localities, or for that matter, in our particular families. Scientists and researchers and physicians such as Dr. Sachs have given us tools for healing and helping, if no definitive cure for what ails us. The pandemic persists in another phase, yet there is no denying the gains we've made in this second year. Now, more than ever, we must find a way to reclaim the spirit of Thanksgiving, to express gratitude for a vital communal project that is only underway and obviously unfinished. In that classic Thanksgiving hymn that opened our worship this morning, choir members sang, "Come, ye thankful people, come, raise a song of harvest home. All the world is but a field given for a fruitful yield, wheat and tares together sown, here for joy or sorrow grown." Perhaps a truer lyric would admit that everything is for joy and sorrow grown. These always coexist in the human condition, much the way that the candles of joys and sorrows crowd that old communion table, set for our kindled lamps each Sunday. Before he received his terminal diagnosis in his 80s, Dr. Sachs had a horrible hiking accident in his 40s that he was convinced would leave him dead. In gratitude, he writes, "In the long hours that followed, I was assailed by memories both good and bad. Most were in a mode of gratitude. Gratitude for what I had been given by others, gratitude too that I had been able to give something back. The amount of anguish and alienation he had known in his young life had not embittered him. In the midst of both good fortune and bad luck, We can always be grateful for our lives. We can always give back a measure of what we have received. In his later years, whenever the weather outside was good, Dr. Sachs would spontaneously exclaim, "I'm glad I'm not dead." Most of us here would echo that sentiment. We are grateful to have survived some things and to have the chance to survive a few more things yet. Gratitude is absolutely elemental to human happiness. Up here in the chancel, hanging from our center railing, you will see a garland prepared by the members of our Gifts of Gratitude group at their last monthly meeting, when they listed what they were most grateful for on paper leaves that then got strung together. This is one fruitful yield of this faith community. This is one harvest of ours brought home during a difficult season. I am conscious that this is my last Thanksgiving service with you in this pulpit, and I have such sadness about that, as glad as I am to be celebrating with you in the sanctuary this morning. I have so many memories of life here at UU Wellesley Hills, and as I begin my own retrospective, my predominant mode is one of gratitude. Gratitude for you, lovely people, and the precious opportunity I have been given to get to know you. The epigraph of Dr. Sachs's little book is this simple sentence: I am now face to face with dying, but I am not finished with living. Perhaps the highest form of acclaim can be the tribute we pay to something that feels to us both intensely worthy and entirely unfinished. Honestly, I am so pleased that the people in our Gifts of Gratitude group are not yet done with their ongoing project of offering their thanksgiving and praise and cultivating their souls and brightening their outlooks and sharing their deepest joys with one another. More joys remain. There can be real excitement in the midst of incompletion, can't there? I hope those folks continue to gather for many more months, possibly many more years to come. Well after my departure, they certainly have my blessing. Give them yours as well.